What is the best possible pick the Cowboys could make at number 26? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
On.
Locked
On.
Cowboys.
Locked on. Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me, as always, is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we've got a bunch of questions today, so let's jump right into it. Our first one, several people want to know, what is your favorite pick the Dallas Cowboys could make at number 26?
I mean, the obvious answer that I told you before the show is Jalen Carter.
We'll get to him.
Look, you guys should really worry about Jalen Carter, and he should fall 25 picks down to the draft.
Sure.
Yeah, look, I think it's you and I did have a conversation before the show started about how this year is very odd, right? Like, I don't have a front runner necessarily. I have a couple of different guys that I like at that pick, but it's not like there's a clear blinking light that this is the guy that I feel like they need. I like the Osiris Torrance. I like Darnell Washington. I could be convinced that Mozzie Smith can be taken at 26. I like Dalton Kincaid. I like, so I know that's not a good answer. Would you say?
So I like all those names. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, right? Is that I feel like it's not a problem. Actually, it's the opposite. I feel comfortable with a lot of the names that we're seeing put there, especially now that it feels like the Cowboys have kind of cleaned up some roster stuff and are obviously in a very good shape with their roster that they can draft kind of the best player available. So, you know, for me, I don't really have a specific name, but at this point, my eyes are going to get wide when I see who's falling, you know, who's fallen out of where they're supposed to be picked that could be made available and fall right into the Dallas's lap at 26. Those are the kind of things. And the Jalen Carter thing was a joke, but maybe not. Like, maybe that type of player falls from, you know, has a CeeDee Lamb type fall, you know, that we took advantage of last time, and the Cowboys are able to scoop up a player. I think the point is that they are able to draft free right now, and we're not holding our breath hoping that player X makes it past this gauntlet of these three teams. Sure. No, I think we can clearly just wait on this to come to us, and a good player is likely to fall to us.
And part of it's just where the Cowboys are drafting, right? Like, when you're drafting at 26, your expectations are different when you're drafting at 10, like the Cowboys were a couple years ago, right? You have a couple guys that you feel like are worth that spot. At 26, there's quite a few options there. So
even 15 to 20, right? Because you're still like getting first round players.
Like, you're hoping a top 10 graded player falls to you.
Exactly.
Right? It's just not going to happen in this draft unless you're talking about a running back, but we're not doing that today. But my favorite pick, again, I like all the names that you mentioned. The guy that if the Cowboys drafted at 26 that would get me the giddiest, if that's a word, is Darnell Washington. Just because I think some of the other tight ends are more polished. They can come in and help you as a receiver right away. But I also feel like Washington kind of has the highest floor and the highest ceiling at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
Because somehow it's true.
Because worst case scenario, he comes in and he's an awesome blocker for you, and he can give you some red zone stuff, you know, goal line work. If he hits a ceiling, we're talking about like a game changer at the tight end position. And that's why I would love to see the Cowboys at least take the chance there at 26.
Look, we've converted some very prominent anti-tight end drafting folks.
You know who you are out there.
You know who you are, Joey. I don't know one in particular. No, I mean, and look, to his credit, and to a lot of other people's credit, like the idea of drafting a tight end in the first round when there are very few tight ends that come into the league that have like we're going to use this word again, generational or kind of extra and above like physical skill and talent. It's pretty rare. Like we get a lot of the same kind of guys who are all kind of in the similar range. Sometimes you get a Kyle Pitts who can run a 4.3 at 245 pounds or whatever it is. But it's very rare that you see these kind of truly unique physical specimens at tight end. And it's even more rare, I would say, especially to get this type of tight end, right? A guy who comes in as a plus blocker right away. And I mean, honestly, I keep saying to people that I don't think he needs to develop as a receiver. I think he just needs to be used as a receiver.
100% agree.
Like it's not a development situation with Washington. It's hey, we don't have the best tight end, receiving tight end maybe in college football history on the other side of the line. So I think that he is going to be a better pass receiver as a pro than he was as a collegiate player. And if you get that plus the kind of blocking you get, again, if we get down to any one of these particular players, I could sell you on any of them being drafted first round pick. But I like Washington a lot for all those reasons. And I think anybody who's, kind of hesitant about drafting a tight end in the first round, this is a different kind of cat. And that's why I think it's worth it.
Well, and the other reason why I like Washington to Dallas is because you're not going to force him into a big role right away as a receiver because you do have Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. Like, I know those guys are still young and they're still developing, but if Washington needs a year, just use him as a blocker and you can use Jake Ferguson or use more receivers or whatever. I just think he makes so much sense for this team that I think I'd be willing to gamble on it late in round one.
And he's different too. That's the other thing about this, like a lot of these tight ends. And even with Dalton Schultz last year, you had 3 tight ends who were very similar. Like physically, I mean, honestly, they were all within an inch and 5 pounds of each other.
That's
right?
The running joke is they could have switched jerseys in practice and you never would have known.
That's not happening with Darnell Washington, man.
No.
He's not hiding behind anybody. So I think it's in the sense that Brandon Cooks was such a great fit for our need, our price range, our scheme fit. I think Washington's similar in the sense that he's different than what you've got. So you can still utilize your other two young tight ends who you like a lot. He's gives you a little bit better blocking, which is something that you'd like to see from those other 2 tight ends. That helps. And then obviously the upside there that down the road he could be if he continues, if he shows you what we think is there with this guy, he could be a main part of your passing offense as well. So I understand why he checks all the boxes and some people are excited.
We have another question about the tight ends that I want to get to right after this. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up. We've got games coming on this weekend. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on literally anything and everything from the money line to point scores to the number of threes drained in the game. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com /lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Landon, we've got another question about these tight ends. There's some people wondering if there's some fatigue about Michael Mayer because he was the #1 tight end in this class for so long. And now that we're getting closer to the draft, people are getting excited about Washington and Luke Musgrave and Dalton Kincaid. Are we overlooking Michael Mayer at all?
I think that's a great question. Honestly, and it's a thought that I literally had this morning as well, because I had done a mock draft and Mayer ended up being, near the top of my list at 26. And, we just haven't talked a ton about him. And I think here's what I think happened. Honestly, he had incredible tape. He's had incredible tape since he's, been in college, right? this process has been a little bit rough for him because of the depth of tight end. There's just so many of these guys to talk about, and B, I think Washington, more than just a little bit, stole the show at the combine, and beyond that too, I was a little bit surprised, and there weren't a lot of losers in the combine in that sense, those numbers were not what I expected. But one of the areas where I was negatively surprised, I would say, was how small Mayer was. I thought that he was a little bit more of a 260 guy.
I thought he was like the Cole Kmet, like the 6'6", 265, right?
He's not. He's like 6'4", 240-ish, 250, right?
249. Yep.
And that kind of, to me, like, I wonder, here's what I'm wondering. I wonder if he didn't get some bad advice, or maybe not bad advice, but it just didn't work out, where he tried to lose some weight to get some speed at the 40, and all he ended up doing was losing weight. Like, I don't know that he actually gained very much speed. I would have rather him come in at 255 and then run a 4.75, right? Like, I because that's what his game shows me, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that those things kind of have, lost a little bit of the luster there. But, look, anytime you turn on the tape and watch this guy play, he clearly is ready to play in the NFL. He's clearly a plug and play starter at tight end, which is pretty rare, to be a two-way plug and play starter in the NFL. So I do agree that I think that the luster has come off his draft grade a little bit. But I still am very, very high on Mike Mayer, and if they drafted him, I would be thrilled. I think he's a great player.
Yeah, I don't think he maybe has the upside of a Dalton Kincaid or Darnell Washington, but the floor is really high. Like, I just don't see him coming into the NFL and being a bad player, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you said the highest floor with Washington, like, the only thing that made me hesitate is Mayer. Right?
Yeah, I mean, just because I can see him. He's going to be a guy every single year catches 50 passes for 750 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, it's just what he's going to do. If you compare him, like, prospect wise, I mean, size, athleticism, he's not all that different than TJ Hawkinson. And TJ Hawkinson went inside the top 10. And I kind of think Mayer is a more polished and a better route runner than Hawkinson was coming out of Iowa. So I do think this process has not been very kind to Mayer, but I think we probably are overlooking him a little bit. Next question. This one from Stevie. He wants to know, tell me the guy that you would be upset with if the Cowboys drafted them at 26.
We're going to do this. We're going to plant our flags.
I mean, there are a couple of guys that have been mentioned with the Cowboys that I'm like, yeah.
Luke Van Ness?
Well, sometimes. I mean, I know that Dan Quinn likes him a lot.
Yeah. Again, I'm mentioning him because this is exactly the kind of player that I just can't scout, man. I just don't understand it with these guys. And I've talked to Owning about it before. I talked to a lot of different guys. Like, sometimes it's good to know what your own weaknesses are. And my weakness is scouting these power defensive ends. I just don't find any appeal in any of them. So Luke Van Ness is my guy.
Okay. Mine is Deonte Banks, the Maryland corner. Like, I really struggle with some of these guys that are great athletes that the college tape doesn't match up. And I think the guy for me that kind of made it where I don't trust these guys ever again is CJ Henderson, who came out of Florida.
Yeah.
2020 draft, where it's like, okay, you got all this athleticism, but there's no production and you didn't grade out well. So, like, why are you suddenly going to be a lot better in the NFL? I don't know. He scares me. He really scares me.
Kiki Ringo is another guy that and I'm talking about specifically in the first round. Like,
yes. Second round,
I just second or third. Yeah, great. Yeah. Fine. But I just don't see a first round corner with this guy. Especially since we were all told what an incredible athlete he was. And he's fast, but I don't know that incredible athleticism is what we've seen so far.
Yeah. I mean, do I have to do a Bijan Robinson stance right here, or does everybody?
I think we all know it's implied. It's implied. Though I will break confidentiality and say before the show that Marcus fully agreed to trading up for a running back, and I'll let him explain himself.
I'm perfectly fine trading up for a running back, not in the first round, right? Like,
breaking news, guys.
Yeah, I like Jamar Gibbs a lot. And I think, in my opinion, there's a significant drop off after the first two running backs. And if you want a guy that potentially has a chance to be special, I think that's Gibbs. And if you're looking for somebody that could potentially replace Tony Pollard after this year, I think Gibbs kind of has that home run speed and the receiving ability and the ability to run between the tackles a little bit. So
got the Camara
yeah,
aspect to him, right?
Here's the thing. Go do a mock draft simulator, which Landon, you and I are going to actually do tomorrow.
That's
Anytime you get to pick 58, tell me if you love your options, because I don't, right?
That was the impetus of the conversation we had, is that we were complaining to the fact that we do these mock drafts, and that now that the Cowboys have kind of shored up their roster a little bit, 58 looks like a wasteland. Every time I get there, I just don't know who to pick. I don't love any of my choices. And we were just debating whether a trade up or down. Maybe that's something we should explore tomorrow on the show. A little tease there.
Yeah,
right?
I just think if you package 58, I think it's 90 together, you could get up into the high 40s, which is probably where Jamar Gibbs is going to be drafted. And if you end up hitting on 26 and you love the guy that you get there and you want to draft another running back, I think that's a pretty good spot to go up and get your guy. Plus, you still have a bunch of day 3 picks. I would be okay with that, Lana. That's all.
It's a brave new world. I don't know what's happening to Cowboys Twitter this season, guys. Things are falling apart. Cats and dogs are living together. The Cowboys, Marcus is drafting running backs.
Hold on. We're trading up. We're trading up out of the first round. It's totally different. Next question. This one from Chris. He just wants to know, do you have a favorite player in this draft? Doesn't necessarily have to be a fit for the Cowboys, but just a guy that you love.
Jackson Smith and Jigba. I love watching him, man. He's just so natural at the position. Like, I don't know. He just does things while he just knows football really well. And he just does things when he has the football that smart players do. He's very natural and he's very easy to watch.
He also ran a pretty good time yesterday at Ohio State.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know how much we want to factor in a 38-yard track that goes downhill.
It's downhill.
But I mean, listen, if he's probably a 4.57 guy, right? And that's fine. It's fine.
Running a 4.5 flat was well beyond, what we expected. Yeah. And to be honest, like, if he really ran a 4.5, like, he would have run that at the combine. He wouldn't have been scared to run that speed at the combine. So, but it's fine. Like, seriously, 4.5 on that OSU track is good enough, because I imagine it's actually 4.55, right? Yes. Like, so yeah, I'm okay with that.
Let's talk some Jalen Carter when we get back. All right, Landon, our final question, and actually I lost it for who it was from, but a couple of people actually wanted to know, at what point would you consider trading up for Jalen Carter? Because it looks like the speculation now is that he is going to fall outside the top 5, maybe outside of the top 10. Is there a point?
That's insanity, man.
Is there a point where you would be like, you know what? It doesn't matter. We're going up to get him.
9, 8. What can we get for 58 and 90? Like, I don't know. Like, no, seriously, all kidding aside, what can we get for 26 and 58? Because as high as 26 and 58 will take me, I will go up and get a Jalen Carter if he's available.
So on the old chart, that would get you up to about 14 or 15. Now, I think we've seen over the last couple of years, and it's making it a little bit easier to trade. So maybe get you up to 12 or 13.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but like, yeah, I would do that in a moment.
Here's the only thing.
Kidding?
If a team like the Bears, who draft at number 9, and the Eagles at 10 pass on him, both teams that could use defensive tackles, what does that say about Jalen Carter?
I think it says something more about the Bears and the Eagles than it does about Jalen Carter. Well, they're idiots. Like, look, here's where I'm at with this, right? NFL teams are terrible at understanding mental health issues, stuff that happens in life. They are going to read this situation very poorly. Regardless of whether, Jalen Carter, is remorseful or whatever his feeling is. And look, I could have a whole podcast about his situation because there is a lot going on there. It's incredibly unfortunate. And the way that a 24-year-old is having to go through all this, I'm hoping with a good support system, because, dealing with the hardest job interview you've ever had while grieving the loss of your friend who just died 2 months ago that you may feel personally responsible for. I can only imagine what that's like, right? But putting all that aside and just talking about football for a moment, the NFL is terrible at reading these situations, and most of the times they'll look at that and if the talent isn't right, they'll just throw that person aside and say, I don't want to deal with that. Jalen Carter is so amazingly talented. I can't imagine that happens. But if it did, the Cowboys should go up and get him. They all have already dealt with a situation like this before. They have history with dealing with these sort of situations. I think that the Cowboys would be a good place for him to go with all this stuff that's going on. And just talking about just talking about the player for a second, because we haven't really talked about Jalen Carter, because the idea that we could draft Jalen Carter is out of our minds insane.
Yep.
Jalen Carter is look, I can't believe we're saying this word again in this podcast, is a generational defensive tackle, right? Like, outside of Aaron Donald, I don't know anybody else who's been as physically gifted or as dominant. I mean, Aaron Donald wasn't as dominant as Jalen Carter was in college football, and Jalen Carter played in the SEC his entire career. So I can't speak highly enough about Jalen Carter, about his play on the field. And if you're asking me, I'm going to get him however we can. Like, I think especially you talk about the need. Imagine Jalen Carter on this defense, guys. Like, imagine it. Like, it would. I'm getting too excited. I would go up and get him with whatever we had available to go get him.
Now, I will say, I don't see him falling outside the top 10, because I do think the Bears and the Eagles would take a chance on him. However, it's not like we haven't seen players drop well beyond where they should be drafted. And we can even do it at the defensive tackle position. I remember 1995 draft. Warren Sapp was considered by far the best player in that draft. And a lot of people thought he could go number 1 to Cincinnati instead of Jalen Carter. He ended up falling, I think, was it 12 or 13 to Tampa Bay? I mean, if he falls to 12 or 13, that's actually in the range where Cowboys could go get him. We've seen Randy Moss, a top 3 player in his draft class, fall to 21. We saw Des Bryant, a top 5 player in his class, fall to 24.
Aaron Rodgers was a quarterback.
Aaron Rodgers was a quarterback. So we literally have seen this happen before. Laremy Tunsil for a different reason. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities that he gets outside the top 10. It's just, if you're Dallas, are you comfortable giving up that many picks to take a guy that 10 other teams passed on? Probably, considering the talent, right?
Yeah. Look, if 10 other people want to make the terrible mistake of not drafting Jalen Carter, I will rightfully throw it in their face when we face the Eagles twice a year with Jalen Carter. I mean, this is look, I understand he's a troubled guy because of what's happened to him off the field. There probably is some stuff you need to work through with him, some maturity stuff, some life stuff. But this isn't a situation where this was a guy who's charged with assault or this isn't necessarily a bad kid. This is a kid who made some terrible mistakes and needs to grow up a little bit. But this isn't like a bad guy. Yeah, he's loved by everyone on his team. He's the most talented player in this draft.
Yeah, I mean it's
not even really that close, honestly. I like Will Anderson and everything, but Jalen Carter, we've been waiting to get drafted for 2 years.
And if you're talking about fit, like just listing all 32 teams, the Cowboys are at the top because they have a super respected defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn. They have Jerry Jones, who has endless amount of resources to help players like Jalen Carter. He's done it in the past. You have a defensive leader like DeMarcus Lawrence on this team. It does make a lot of sense from that way, but we probably have already spent 7 minutes too many talking about Jalen Carter, because I still think he ends up in the top 6 or 7 picks.
Of course he does. Yeah, we spent a lot of time on a guy the Cowboys are not going to ever sniff, but
you never know.
You never know.
You never know. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen. I'll make your second listen, the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go check out the podcast on YouTube. We upload shows there every single day. Go follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Tomorrow, we're back with a mock draft simulator. We'll see you guys then.